Good afternoon. Welcome to the special council meeting of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan, where we're going to be discussing the budget today. I'm going to call the meeting to order on Thursday, February 2nd, 2023 at 1 p.m. Correction. So with the meeting called to order, we're going to then start with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Cavan-Monaghan is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to First Nations for their care and teaching about these lands, and may we honor these teachings. Now I'm looking to council for approval of the agenda before us today, moved by Councillor Byrne, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Looking for a disclosure of pecuniary interest or any general nature thereof at this time. Seeing none, we'll move forward. There is no closed session. The first order of business before us today is a presentation from the Cavan-Monaghan Public Library Board budget. Carla, I will turn the floor over to you. And just as Carla makes her way up, as a formality, there is an updated materials that have been circulated by the clerk. I think we all have them. So to start the meeting, for Carla's sake, we need a motion to receive those informations or those updated informations. Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. All right, Carla. Well, now that we have received the information, it's over to you to walk us through it.
Good afternoon. With the timing of the appointment of the library, the new library board and the old one going out, working on the budget this year has been a little bit more complicated, especially with the lack of continuity on the library board with the number of new members. A second draft I always find more difficult. And I mean, these are some of the notes on the top of the document. Earl is going to speak to some of the other pages. But in our first draft, we stated that our vision is that the library continues to be a trusted local partner committed to improving the economic, social, and environmental vitality of our municipality. We do this by empowering members and residents through access to high-quality resources, safe and welcoming spaces, innovative programs, and valuable services that connect them with their neighbors and the world. The staff of the Cavan-Monaghan Libraries are proud to be frontline representatives of the township. We provide barrier-free spaces where all are welcome. I'm not sure if some of you got a chance to see, I was interviewed yesterday for Check's morning show. 4.5 minutes disappears very quickly, but I was able to really talk about the library, our new library of things, our unusual items that we have started to loan. And it was, I hope, great PR for both the library and the township. After I finished on the TV, Danny from the morning show pulled me over into a 3-minute spot on Fresh Radio. And they again mentioned Millbrook, many things to come and do in the village. I'm going to have Earl come up. Do we need to take over for a moment?
All right, thank you everyone for having us. I think most of you know I'm an accountant by trade, and my job, as I see it, is to summarize and interpret information for you, which is why I've put a ton of it on one page, because I find that one page is what people can normally focus on. And what you see here, I'm going to say this as a joke, but my hottest selling item, whether I'm doing a tax return or a multi-billion-dollar company, is a 5-year comparative, because it really shows you where you've been and hopefully where you're going. And I think when we talk about the library, what I want you to look at is, I mean, I'm sure most of you know this, but the last 2021 and 22 were kind of dark years in terms of we didn't get capital funding, and we basically struggled through with donations and the sheer strength of Carla's will, which is formidable. And the biggest problem we have with this budget is if the rule is 9.5% of last year, well, we can't do that. You know, we didn't have sustainable money last year. And what I want you to look at, if we sneak up here, we're actually asking you for an increase of 8.9% over 2020. And you know, that I think that isn't too big an ask. The other thing that we have done is we sent the original number in, really not knowing which way council was thinking. We sent a new one in. We're cutting our ask for our collection basically in half. or for our capital budget. And by that, we're trying to show you guys, we are trying to be a team. We understand money is tight, but we'd like to have a sustainable operation. What else can I tell you? I guess, but we might as well emphasize that the biggest challenge we have, of course, is we're now under pay equity. If we move that up to the top of the expenses line, you'll see a huge increase in salaries and benefits, and that isn't more hours or more people. That is just coming into line with pay equity and increasing the rate we got from the township, which was 7.5%, I think, and having everyone on the grid. That is what we're all coping with. I'm not saying my problem is harder than yours, but what we're putting before you, I think is the best we can do. I don't know if we're allowed to accept questions, but I'd love to answer them.
Thank you. Off and on, there we are. Members of council, questions for either Carla or Earl at this time? Councillor Edgerton.
There it goes. This pay act seems to be a fair jump. Can you give us a little explanation? We're going that way this year.
Oh, I'm not really the person with all the background, but the answer is adjusting to pay equity has been a festering sore for a long time. And we finally got it done last June with a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of help from council.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. I think you guys have done a wonderful job on the capital side. I mean, bringing it down almost 50% is admirable and should be commended. Thank you very much for doing that. But I'm still struggling with your operating. Like even if everybody else is targeting 9 or 10%, you're coming in still well over 16%. So I mean, your comparator of your 8.9% compared to 2020. It's not a very fair comparator because you did get a fair amount of capital in 2020. So, your capital is kind of compensating for the fact that your operating is still growing disproportionately to everything else. And the problem with that is the operating never comes back down. So next year we have the same problem and then another problem and another problem. So I don't think you got your operating under control yet. Capital, you've done tremendously, but I don't see it in that operating side.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Huntley. Other questions? Councillor Byrne?
Through you, Chair. I'm just curious, when you look at the staff for the library, that includes how many people and what categories? I'm just trying to wrap my head around some of the expenses.
So we have 7 positions with the library. None of us are full-time. Aaron and I are at 32 hours a week, and the others are all less hours than that. We have library clerks, a catalog database manager, an assistant librarian, a programmer, the branch librarian, and me as CEO. So those are the categories that we have. We have a grid that we use for our wages, which is built similarly to the township's grid. The main reason for the big change is that this was through the pay equity. They insisted that we had a grid, and we compared the grid to grid for doing pay equity in 2022. Not all the staff were on the grid, but if we have a grid, they should all be on it. And so that's what this reflects. Next year's increase, as far as I know, would only be cost of living, because once we've done this catch up, this change from the budget of 2022 to the budget of 2023, that's all that's left is cost of living increases, the same, or the CPI, the same as what's used at the township.
Thank you, Carla. Other questions, members of council? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, I thought we did the pay equity catch up by the end of last year. So I'm confused on why we're catching it up again.
So the pay equity started in December 2021, and then reports started coming in from the HR company in January. And it was finally June and July when we came up with a settlement. So the retroactive was covered at that time, but it wasn't part of the budget. And so what this is, and we received no new monies from the township to cover pay equity. The library covered all of it, and you were given the reserve schedule, or like how we did that as part of closed sessions. But what we're comparing is the amount that was given last year by the township and the amount that's needed this year after the change in wages based on pay equity. I'm not sure, does that answer the question? Because it was resolved in 2022, but this year there's the change in the wages and what was budgeted last year to what's budgeted for this year.
I might be able to help Carla. So I think what we're confronting is that there wasn't a budget in the operational budget for the pay equity adjustment. So there was, in the closed session discussion between that council and the library staff, was a conversation about, in the absence of a budget for the operating increase that the pay equity adjustment resulted in, there would need to be some alternative funding source to make that gap up. So that was a riddle solved last year, but not a riddle solved by budgeted amount. So this year is what would it be calling, the acknowledgement or the recognition in the budget of that adjustment being reality now. Is that a fair summary? Accurate? Okay. Other questions, members of council? I have one, just out of curiosity, while everyone else catches their breath. In the operating or in the general ledger, so more of the keystone documents, Carla, there's a line under the salaries and benefits that's specifically a pay equity grant of the amount of $7,064. I believe and I'm trying to remember in my history of the last predating council, that grant has been fairly consistent in the amount, correct?
That amount has not changed since 1998.
So by that logic, so that by a rough math, that's about 27 years, correct? Give or take, 1 or 2? Okay, so the issue that I think that's been part of the lingering issue is that this money that we've been receiving for that amount of time has not been utilized to implement or address the fiscal realities of managing pay equity. And now that we've gotten past it all, it's not enough to maintain it, but hopefully in future years, that money will be exclusively dedicated towards the ongoing maintenance of the now created and established pay equity grid. Is that a fair statement?
That money has always been used solely for the purposes of wages. It lowers the levy request by $7,000. We've never been asked to, never shown it as how it would apply to pay equity maintenance per se, but it's always been used to lower the levy request by that amount and been put towards wages. Versus we have another line in the operating summary called Province of Ontario grants, I think it is, which is for $13,000. And that is money that's just given as general operating funds from the provincial government.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I understand that. And if in the due diligence that I was doing in preparation for this meeting, because we've done something with the pay equity monies, doesn't mean it's the appropriate use of the funds. And in the grant specifically, it's online, it's fairly prescriptive in what it suggests it's for. I mean, it's very prescriptive in even just being called a pay equity grant. And I think we've had the benefit in the history of, because we are below, I think it's a $13,000 or $15,000 threshold, that those funds aren't subject to an audit. But if we were to exceed, because of the size and scope that I'm assuming, or what I've read that that grant is based on, because we're below that threshold, we're not subject to an audit. But in my realizing or reading and research on this grant, I don't believe the providers of those monies would be very happy or have any intention of it being used to offset operational cost increases other than pay equity. And so I just wanted to make that statement that's concerning. Obviously, I think for smaller libraries, for smaller amounts, there's not a lot of enforcement when it comes to the follow-up. And because we're below that threshold, we have the benefit of not having that oversight. But I think it's very important moving forward that we are far more careful with how we use that money, as you know, and as we know, that we're getting a lot more scrutinized when it comes to DC charges or other sources of alternative funding, that the province is starting to announce that they are going to do their own audits of how municipalities and municipal partners spend some of these monies. So I think moving forward, it's going to be really important from an operational standpoint that we're figuring out how we're going to recognize that exclusive money for that intended and exclusive purpose, because it's really important. The fact that we might have received upwards of $190,000 over those 27 years, if we're getting $7,000 a year, and yet we've had the friction or the fictitious conversation about whose responsibility pay equity is. But here's a grant specifically and exclusively for implementing and helping fund that issue that we haven't been dedicating towards that issue. And now we're asking the ratepayers to take up the mantle and the burden of that cost. So I think if that's how we've been doing it before, it's one of those things where maybe it was okay because we're below that threshold. But the way things are going, we're getting our wrists slapped, and I'm sure Ms. Pope will talk to some of those contents. We're getting far more scrutinized on this sort of thing. And if we're not in accordance with what they're being prescriptive or what the funds are intended for, we're going to lose them altogether in some cases. So I just wanted to make that statement that it's really important moving forward that we figure out that we're not using this as a subsidy, because it says in the grant that that is not what it's there to do. It is not as flexible as the provincial grants. So just a word to the wise, I just don't want us to get in trouble, or heaven forbid they come a calling saying, hey, that money that we gave you before this pay equity system existed and you didn't use it for that, that's a problem for us. So just more protectionist for us moving forward. But I echo Deputy Mayor Huntley's comments about, having been a part of that board meeting. I think the capital adjustment is very reflective of the fiscal reality, and I really appreciate the work of the board in doing that. And if there's no more questions, Councillor Burns, sorry.
Through you, Chair, this is not really to Carla specific, just because of my lack of knowledge and experience. This CPI gets thrown back and forth with just wage increases as far as adjustments for the inflation and whatever. The track record of it, how much does it fluctuate? Is this a high or is this a low? When I talk to people that I represent, I'd like to have some grasp of what they can look or expect forward as this goes on, because definitely the inflation is not going down in this country. So I just wonder.
So sorry, I think. Oh, Ms. Pope, would you like to speak to that? I know that there's been comments before that this is an outrageously high deviant year. Yeah, and so, but I'll let Ms. Pope speak to it.
Thank you. Through the chair to council. We've actually had 3% or less on average, and there were a few years where we had less than even a percent, so a 0.5% or a portion of a percent. This is a large year, but you'll see that across the board in development charges and the indexing as well there. So this is 7% is a very high number. It's not a usual number that council will see, and we hopefully anticipate that that will come back down to something that we're more accustomed to, which is around 3%, give or take. It might have been 2.25, 2.75, but that's a more realistic number. And again, depending on the times, but 7% is high.
Is that satisfactory answer? Perfect. Any other questions for Carla or Earl while they're here with us? Seeing none, we'll then take a motion to receive the presentation and the updated presentation and information. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is received. Thanks very much for the questions and the work. both of you. And with that, we move on to the next step of the agenda, which is Miss Pope's time to shine. Kimberly, to you.
Thank you. Through the chair to council, I'm just going to do an overview of the recommendations, speak about the changes between first and second draft, and then I'll pause because the second half of my presentation will actually walk through the budget. The reason being the first budget that I presented to you in December, I provided a slideshow with additional complementary items to assist with training and transition. This time we'll actually walk through the report. The reason being that we try to keep our reports as similar as possible in format so that you can go back year over year and do comparatives. So at first, the recommendations, we do have 3 recommendations before you today in this report. It's either going to be number 1 or number 2. So either there's a 5.1% municipal residential tax rate increase if the budget were left as presented today, or 2, the council will receive it and provide direction today through motions to reduce that, and therefore at the end of our meeting, we'll have a new percentage that we can have. So it'll either be 1 or 2, and we are asking, I'll go into further detail as we walk through the report, but we're asking a pre-approval for the SCBA units to be purchased with the upset limit in the budget. The reason for this is to participate with autonomy to proceed with a tender to replace these units that are to expire in 2024. And we want to make sure that we get ahead to gain the optimum price and provide ample time for extended delivery timelines and lead time constraints. So we'll talk about that as we move through the report. This is just an overview on the second portion there if we move down. So again, I'm just reiterating that with the changes that came into place, we were able to reduce the budget from that original 9.4 down to 5.1 for council today for review. We will have our public meeting again tonight to discuss this as well and any changes that happen during the day today. The second draft budget presentation has an overall decrease of approximately $365,000 and therefore made up of the following. The motion that council passed at the last meeting are the first 3 bullet points, and they're identified which motions, but I'll just reiterate. 25,000 capital reduction for the corporate strategic plan, moving it down to 25 in this current budget. There was a $50,000 capital reduction when the MVT Bridge boardwalk repairs were removed, and a $96,912 capital reduction when we removed the crossroad culverts. Those 3 were as per motion of council from the first budget meeting. Subsequent to that, we have some additional changes with the budget committee and discussions with management and staff. The first being a reduction of a net $111,101 on the CMCC splash pad water features and fitness equipment that was originally presented in the first draft budget. The Parks and Recreation Master Plan is expected to be finalized in the fall of 2023 and to be presented to council at that time. Phase 3 is the design and is scheduled for 2024. Unfortunately, with the grant, we have confirmed that those timelines do not align with the Ontario Trillium Fund grant. They have a starting date of no later than May 31st. It also must be completed within 12 months of that day, and OTF has confirmed there's no flexibility on this timeline. We have asked. Therefore, to await the delivery of the Parks and Rec Master Plan in order to proceed with any approval of any future recreational capital projects, this will be withdrawn after this meeting today. We want to make sure we present it to council. So they are aware of this report to council, and I will follow up with them following that. There was a $60,000 Parks and Facilities capital transfer to reserves in replacement of for a splash pad at $50,000 and Maple Leaf playground equipment of $10,000 in this revision. There's a reduction of $89,000 in the operating carry forward. We had 3 positions. They were part-time positions that we were not able to fill last year, but we did budget for it in the 2022 year. We do have the funds still remaining, so we have transferred those funds forward, therefore not costing the taxpayer any additional money in 2023. $51,450 operating estimate that was included in, or sorry, it was $122,000 in the original budget. We reduced it to half because we only need to budget for the last quarter, whereas the last report had half a year. So we reduced that in half, which is a $51,000 reduction. And there are other various operating budget revisions that have happened as well. Once we've amended all the actual fuel and received all the levies, corporate insurance. We've matched the budget accordingly with a small percentage increase. So therefore, that's why those numbers have changed as well. So just to speak to the pre-approval request for Protective Services Fire, the fire department will be participating in a joint tender with Autonomy South Monaghan for the replacement of self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBAs. The 2023 capital budget includes CPAs for a total cost of $398,000. It's currently funded as $186,500 through reserves, the emergency equipment reserves, $105,750 from the asset replacement reserve, and then this year through the property tax base, $105,750. The fire department is requesting the pre-approval so that they can proceed with the tender prior to the final budget approval to replace them. I think I'll just stop there because we're getting into the body of the report. That's just a quick summary of the changes that have occurred, and I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thanks very much, Ms. Pope. There's two ways I think we should probably consider. One, we could consider the motion for the pre-approvals first, just to get it out of the way, because I think it's a priority. Chief, is there something you would like to contribute or speak to in the motion at this point, or does maybe council have any questions for the chief with regards to the pre-approval? So I see that. So Chief, we'll let you make your way to this, or you have a mic there. Never mind. Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. I get the concept with the supply chains and all the rest. If we get this equipment in a timely fashion, does that shorten the span of life that we use the ones? Like I see they're supposed to be renewed every 10 years. If I start buying things at 8 years, am I costing myself money?
Through the mayor to Councillor Burns, that's an excellent question. And in our tender, we've put in provisions for that. So your bottles have a 15-year lifespan. The units themselves in total have a 15-year lifespan. And the bottles in particular have that requirement, 50, but much like your propane bottles at home, okay, on your barbecues. So we put that the delivery of those stamp dates must be within 3 months of receiving, so that we're not being shortchanged in the tender, to speak to your point. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Chief. Other questions? I believe Councilor Edgerton has a question.
Yeah, I got this on here. Did the mayor here out there, and that you put a little bit of money away each, because you know time life on these things, Chief, and also you spoke about them. They cannot be hydrostatic tested. It's not feasible to do that, correct?
Just waiting for the light here. So through the mayor to Councillor, I'll answer the first part of the question. The lifespan of the units that the bottles that you're speaking with, although you may be able to do them, it's not feasible. The lifespan of them, it's going to cost you more than what they're really worth. And then the other part of the equation is the units themselves, the suppliers, that you may get a few extra years out of it, but then the parts start to become unavailable. And so then you struggle with that. So you end up in the end, in my opinion, you'll be, that money in half again is where you'll end up. So that's why we're asking for the replacement on the units. And then, sorry, the second part of your question was about reserve money. And yes, past councils have approved monies every year, a portion, and it varied throughout the years, because if those reserves weren't there, the request today would be for the full 398,000. So there's 186, I'm just trying to find it there on the page, in reserves, and then there's some out of asset replacement. So it's a mixture. To answer your question, yes, there's a little bit of money put away each year for the replacement of these units.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to the chief. I assume if you're going in with autonomy for this this tender, that you're hoping to get kind of economies of scale on this. Does that mean you're going to try to get more units or are you trying to get a lower price?
Through the mayor to Deputy Mayor Huntley. No, we're looking to get a better price. It's the economy of scale. We did this in 2009 when we've done, this isn't the first time we've done joint tenders with our neighboring municipality. We've done them on SCBA's, fire trucks. And the hope is that instead of Cavan Monaghan purchasing 30 SCBA units, we can, I believe that autonomy is looking somewhere in the neighborhood of the same amount. So we're looking at 60. So the suppliers do sharpen their pencils, as the expression goes, and we're hoping for a better value.
Thank you, Chief. Other questions? If not, we can entertain a motion for the third recommendation in the report. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That motion is approved. So that just, clerk, do you have what we need on the paper there? So we're good. You don't need me to read the motion. Perfect. So congratulations, Chief. Good luck with the tender. For the sake of the library representatives, maybe we should bump them up to the discussion so we can have that fresh in our minds. And if there's other questions, we can discuss that budget now. So is that fair? Everyone's okay with that? And then we'll go back to Kimberly. Perfect. So there's there's a few different ways to do it. Would anyone, with regards to the discussion on the capital, I think, as Deputy Mayor Huntley mentioned, I think that there's been a lot of work done there. And I think the 32,000 is a responsible ask. So maybe we can break this down into two components if the clerk is amenable. So I would be willing to make the motion that we approve the capital requirement or the capital ask from the library budget at this time and with appreciation of the work. So I'll make that motion, looking for a seconder. Councillor Batchoff. And then any questions or discussion of that motion this time? Okay, then we'll vote. All in favor? Okay, there you go. The capital is carried. There was additional comments and questions about the operating. How would council like to proceed in that regard of that budget? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. I still struggle with the almost 17% increase in the operating. I'd like to see it more efficient. And I'd support a motion, or I would make a motion, I should say, to push it closer to what our average operating increase is across the municipality. I don't know, Ms. Pope, if you have that number. I think it's 9.5 or 9.1. I would make a motion to 9.1% increase on that operating.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Would anyone entertain a seconder for that motion? Councillor Natchoff, any questions about the motion before we proceed to a vote? Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair, I'm just wondering what has to be cut from their operations as far as the community, what they expect and what they would like to see from the library to get to that magic number that seems to be acceptable.
That's a question. I don't know if we'll be able to get an answer for that because we're just providing that notice on the spot and the board would have to meet to discuss. So what we could do is ask the board to come back to council at a later date with a summary of their plans for, if the motion is carried, of a report of that nature with the operational increase as such. Does that make sense? Through you, Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I guess the question comes back to Carla, like the question is when they have a board meeting and our final, like our next meeting for budget is the 21st. So we're really hoping to have, like if you're asking Carla to come back, coming back on the 21st is a bit, difficult for us to pass the budget at that time.
Well, I guess we may as well see what the motion, if the motion carries or not before. Councillor Byrne, I don't know if we can get an answer with this turnaround unless Carla, would you like to, or Earl, would you like to speak to, make a comment?
I was just quickly trying to run some numbers. If you want to, our expenses other than wages are only 47,000. And if you're asking us to cut I'm thinking over 20,000. That's sort of half of our operating expenses. And then the question becomes, are you suggesting we lay people off and cut our service hours? You know, the one thing that I didn't manage to say when you asked your first question is if you look at our expenses that have increased since 2019, our virtual branch expenses have doubled and our lightning fast internet costs have doubled. And we don't look at that as runaway expenses. We look at that as living in the 21st century.
Then wait. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Yep, obviously, you know, like I said, I think we have the documents before us and the implications thereof, but so there's a summary. I don't think, from my understanding of the Library Act, we can't make prescriptive comments or direction with regards to the operational changes to the library. So we can't provide that sort of insight or specificity just to the nature of how things are managed separately with their acts. So unfortunately, unlike other departments, we can't be as prescriptive. It's not our role and it's not our jurisdiction in a way, so to speak. So we can't really dictate what changes can be made. We are really reserved to only finalizing what the numbers are on the checks. So that's just because it's a separate act. It's not the municipal act, it's Library Act. So we can't make those kinds of prescriptive things. It would be an overextension of our jurisdiction, so to speak. So that said, there's still a motion on the floor. If there are other questions with regards to the motion, otherwise we will move to a vote. No more questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion? That is carried 4-1. Thank you very much. So that is clear. Clerk, do you have direction on that?
Through you, Mayor, for clarification. So the motion that has just been approved is that we've requested the library board to come back with a review of an operating budget that's more aligned to a 9.1% increase.
Deputy Mayor Hunley says that's correct. Very good. Ms. Pope, is that clear for your purposes moving forward, that the budget moving forward will reflect that? And then obviously we'll wait to see the outcome of that meeting or that report.
I think there's just a bit of language there perhaps because what we're doing is we're actually adjusting down to the 9.1. I did a quick calculation. It's $306,520. So I think that should go into the motion. In addition to that, we're not waiting for the library board to come back with adjustments after that. That's more of an information report to council, not really a budget report. So I'm not sure with her timelines if she'll make it back for next budget. So we go ahead with the 9.1%. We reduce it. They come back when they can, and not that it's a pending final approval. That way nothing is held up and we can continue with our process.
Is that the intention of the motion, Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, that's the way it's going to have to play out. Yeah. So I guess the motion would then be to put an operating budget for the library at 306,000 and 520.
Okay, then we're all clear, clerk?
I just want to confirm for final clarification, Chair, that ultimately what we've now just approved is the operating budget for the library board of $306,520 for 2023.
That is accurate in my interpretation. Thank you. Very good. All right, with that said and that behind us, we'll move on with the rest of the budget deliberations. Back to you, Ms. Pope.
Thank you. I'll just wait 1 second to move over to the report and that'll be perfect. So we just passed the pre-approval request and we were moving to the tax rate percent alternatives, which is, I believe, page 3. Perfect. Thank you. So therefore, because we are talking about reductions, I thought I would provide the table again. There was a table provided in the first report for a tax rate percentage alternatives. If you were to look at between 2.5 or 4.5%, and council wasn't content with the 5.1 that there is there today. The tax increase is shown on the left. For example, if you wanted to go to a 3%, we would need a reduction of 225,000. If we went to 3.5, a reduction of 172,000. So it's just to keep that information at the forefront for you as we begin to talk and move through the budget. As a reminder, we did, at the first draft, I did provide you with an estimated MPAC world total. We don't have that information as of the time of our first budget meetings in December, but we definitely have it for the second meeting. And that has been updated. So the actual 1% increase would equal $106,900 in revenue. So 1% is equal to 106,900. The year-to-date actuals on the detailed reports that you've received and the summary reports presented on the agenda include up to November 30th and any December invoices that we have received as of the time of this report. When you receive the final report, we should have had all of the December invoices in, as we have just finalized those and rolled the year forward. Tax levy comparison. So the 2023 draft is just left blank there for you at this time. This is just to show you what we've done over the past year since 2019, between 2.5, 3.2, 1%, and 2.85%. So this year not yet set, but the weighted assessment you can see has grown by about 2% over last year. Remembering too, back to our presentation from MPAC and all the documentations that we provide, we are using CVA values of 2016, regardless if it is a brand new build happening today or if it's a home that has existed historically. That will remain in place until the government and legislation allows for the update to occur, and that will happen province-wide. In summary, a 1% municipal tax levy increase would equal $6.95 extra on every $100,000 of assessment. So if someone owned a $400,000 home, it would be $27.80. And remembering that this $100,000 and $400,000 reference that I'm using is current value assessment, not what they could sell the property for today. We do know that homes selling between $800,000 to up $1 million are assessed at the 2016 value of about $400,000 to $450,000. So no one has $1 million on the tax roll for a home that's assessed back in 2016 at that value. The next section here is the MPAC provincial property assessment update. We did go into detail at the last meeting, just talking about how we've had the postpone of the update from the ministry. It was postponed in 2022, 2021, and now again in 2023. So residents who've had a property and haven't made any changes to their property, haven't built anything new, haven't severed, haven't consolidated, it's basically the same property that it was back then. They have the same CVA value. When we all move to the new valuation system, and there'll be a lot of education and announcements, and the ministry will do a great job on that, you will see that we will all move forward. But we're talking about a denominator, a number at the bottom. What's the total amount that we need to run this municipality divided by the total amount of assessment? So it's not an automatic, oh, my taxes are going to triple. That's not the case. We will go through those things in detail once we have the information from the ministry, just reminding you that we're dealing with 2016 values at this time in all the reporting. This is the same schedule that I had provided. Unfortunately, it's cut again. We'll have to figure that out. But just showing that usually there's a 4-year phase in. Usually if you had a home that was 200,000, that was going to 300,000, you'd have $25,000 increments every year and just grow each year. So because there hasn't been, we've been stagnant, but again, we're following the ministry. There's nothing that we can do about that. Operating. So it was mentioned just earlier here a moment ago about the 9.1%. If we go down to the chart, you'll see that within all of our departments, we were able to bring consolidated together down to 9.1% is the overall increase between last year's budget and this draft of the budget. As you can see, departmentally, there are variations, and we always make sure to report the dollar value in addition to the percentage, because obviously if you look at bylaw, it seems incredible that it's a 300% increase. However, it's a $42,000 increase there. So just to keep it with reality and what's actually occurring there, we'll speak to each of the different departments as we go through and any questions that you might have for each department, but that's the summary. When we look down further at the first draft report, we did not have all of the levies presented at that time, and we didn't have the policing information, but now we do. All of that has been updated. Also in the council budget, the roll forward is just what's available as of the end of 2022, and that was modified as well here. So you'll see the changes there through all the different consolidated other services. They went up about 10.2% if you're looking at them as a unit by themselves. And then if you look at all of us together, you would come to a 9.4% increase. That's the portion that actually affects the property tax base. The next section, water, wastewater, it's for your information, but it is not related to the property tax base. This is related to the water and wastewater user fees. That's a study that looks at the 10-year and sets out the 5-year rates based on the future, the growth, the capital required, and the operating. So that does not have any bearing on the property tax base, but we like to show you what kind of increase in operating they're also experiencing this year, and they're at about a 3.3%. So overall, as a municipality as a whole, 8.4%, but the 8.4 isn't related to property taxes only. It's property taxes and water. The same information remains the same for the Canadian Union Public Employees Union agreements. They were signed and increased over the 3-year term from 2022 to 2024. It's 5.25%. And the consumer price index did rise 7%. That is an annual average for 12 months, year to year. And we collect the data that's released in September, and it represents August to August. It is not just simply looking at 1 month for clarification. The construction price index rose 15.6%. You would have heard of that through a report that went through the county recently. If you saw the development charges report, we have a development charges report coming to council at February 21st meeting. That information will be explained in further detail. However, the indexing of 15.6% applies to us as well. And council had approved the user fees and charges bylaw last year on November 7th. And that is also reflected in here. You'll notice under the CMCC, there's some great programming coming, and we're looking forward to the revenues that are coming through that and the changes that'll happen down at the CMCC. Departmental summaries, we can stop here and pause at each department if you'd like to ask questions about each department operationally, or I can continue through and just get through the summary and then go back to questions. How would you prefer to proceed?
I see a question from Councilor Burns, so we'll take that question now, and then depending how that goes, we'll see how we go next.
Through you, Chair. Sorry, I didn't want to break your role there. Back to when we were talking about the impact statements, could I ask you a question about that, please? I was just wondering, so I think I got my head wrapped around it, but say in 2025, they finally get their act together and they say, okay, we're going to go by the new market value assessment, which they've been doing all the way along. They just haven't released them. So in that case, if I had a $400,000 home as of 2/16 and my taxes in 2025 go up by 0%, but the market value assessment jumps 2 or 3 times, what I pay will jump 2 or 3 times?
Through you, Chair. That's an excellent question. Unfortunately, it's a misunderstanding, but I do understand why, because as soon as you see a jump in number, you assume that it's the associated change on the other side of the fence. If I could explain it this way, if your property increases between 2016 and your new value by 10%, and if everyone's property also increased by 10%, you in effect won't see a single change because you still hold the same weight of the overall pie. If your property on a 10% overall, if everyone in the municipality merged together was 10% and you only increased 8%, you're less. So you'll actually see a decrease in your CVA value, which means less property taxation. If your property was, say, 20%, and overall for the municipality, we increased 10%, then you're actually going to receive that 10% extra as a CVA value, which will be multiplied by your tax rate. So it depends. If you move in the same percentage that everyone else moved, then you'll be exactly the same. But if you move less than the overall average, you'll have a little bit less. If you move more than, you'll have a little bit more. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Other questions at this time before we keep going through departments?
Okay, I'll let you keep going with your discussion then, and we'll go through the departments. And if questions arise, just wave at me until I see you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have the summary of changes. These ones affect all of our departments. So rather than repeat them over and over again under each heading, we place them all together. So all of the source deductions, which are legislated, OMERS, EI, CPP, EHT, WSIB, Manulife, et cetera, they've all been adjusted, included in this budget and updated. The corporate insurance allocations came down to 30% from the original ask. And then, of course, that hits every department. So that covers all of us. 9% OMERS eligibility. I did have a question about this actually, and I'll provide some clarification here just because that question was presented to me. Historically, we've been at 9%. So that isn't a 9% increase. That's the same. But the change in January 1st of 2023 was part-time employees who were hired used to have to work for 2 years and accumulate 700 hours per year over that 2-year period. And then they became eligible. And then in year 3, we could add them to the benefit program. The change for this year is all staff, part-time or full-time, are coming in. So when we say 9%, we've had to add 9% for our part-timers, which historically we haven't had to do. So that's really what that sentence is referring to. 9% OMERS eligibility for part-time staff. That's new. The 7% we've spoken about on the CPI wage grid. Our increases are moderate. We're hoping consumption and rate increases, will work together, but we applied 3% for hydro, gas, and fuel, 2% for VoIP landline phone, and any internal allocation expense lines we left at 2%. And of course, included are the debenture estimates for all 3 of the capital projects that are currently ongoing. And they're included here with the one adjustment that I mentioned earlier with the fire department, just to represent the last quarter of the year. Therefore, we'll move through the departments and perhaps pause at the end of each summary if there's any questions about the detailed pages that were circulated to council, if you have any questions. And we'll start with planning and economic development. They had an overall increase of 9%, which is $52,235. And primarily it's attributed to the economic development events and advertising and the vacant planner position and contracted professional services to assist during the transitional period.
Any questions with regards to the increases of the operational changes to the planning and economic development department? Okay, continue on.
The building department. Now, the building department is not funded through the municipal tax rate. It's funded through building permit revenues. And if there's ever a surplus or a deficit in that particular department, it never hits the property tax base, always goes back to the building department reserve. The building department is funded, and therefore it does not affect the municipal tax rate. It has an average increase of 2.1%, which is $8,255, primarily attributed to the grid indexing for wages and benefits.
Seeing no questions. Okay, we'll keep going.
The bylaw department has an increase of 304%, but it's actually $42,379. It is due to a part-time bylaw officer position in collaboration with municipal partnership and cost sharing with the County of Peterborough. The budget request is proposed for gradual phasing in of bylaw enforcement with increased population of more than 10,000 people, and the new subdivision to be assumed by the township with the issues that will increase bylaw enforcement, such as parking and neighborhood complaints, which will also be more complex related to animal control services.
Councillor Byrne and Councillor Edgerton. Oh, did you have one as well, Deputy Mayor Huntley? Okay, we'll go for you, Councillor Edgerton.
This thing down here. Mr. Mayor, the building department here, you're talking about hiring another bylaw officer. I do believe that we have a contract company looks after bylaw. Is that still in effect or not?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Edgerton. Unfortunately, that's not still in effect. We did have a really good contracted service with Kawartha Guard. They're very efficient, did really good service, and they're quite equitable. Oh, that's not the right word. Economic, that's what I'm going for. And they were working really well for years, but they have actually retired and sold off their business. So we can't use them anymore. We're looking at quite a few alternatives. The CEO and myself with possibly with the county, other municipalities. Again, we're looking still at contracting too, but we're just trying to find a solution to the varying busyness of the building department and the bylaw department. If they're both busy at the same time, bylaw tends to take a back seat. So we're looking at a lot of alternatives, but yeah, unfortunately, Kawartha Garrett's no longer with us.
Okay, so if you're gonna have this here in conjunction with the county and that, who's supplying the person with a half ton? Is that something else that's coming up later? And I do believe that the fire can do their own bylaws and the roads can do their own bylaw stuff. So why are we getting hooked up with somebody to work with the county?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, it's not, we haven't worked that out. We're still early on in discussions with them. So we're not totally understanding of what their bylaw person is doing for roads and whatever they're doing for the county at the moment. So we're just looking at that route. We've budgeted kind of worst case of a 3-day-a-week person for a bylaw, which would include zoning, property standards, possibly noise, although the police do most of our noise, any of our other bylaws that roads and fire don't do. So this was kind of a worst case budgetary number that we put in to explore options. Currently bylaw is still with me, so I'm still doing it. So we'll find out where the discussions go as to your good point with the gas, fuel, trucking, all that. That's still to come through the conversations that we're having, but we're just trying to find an alternate source when it does get busier, how we're going to deal with it.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Phillips, along with the bylaw officer, would it also not also be revenue generating at the same time? Because this number is showing the cost of a person coming in, but is it reflecting the revenue that they would also attribute to them?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Huntley. It's not, because we still are early on in that discussion. So we'd have to look at what those revenues would be. We're also in conversations about a couple new revenue options, the AMP that the city's doing, stuff like that. But mainly the only revenues that come in would be through fines. We usually get things resolved before we get to the point of fines. So it's not a big revenue generator for us, although it could be. And if we're looking to offset the cost, we definitely look at what those alternatives are.
Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. Now, is there a big uptick in bylaw problems or complaints coming in? And you were mentioning how this was like a 10,000 threshold per population. We'd be just tipping that now. And my last question would be, will the decision to actually hire somebody full-time or part-time, whatever it turns out to be, come back before council at some time in the future?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. Yes, bylaws since the start of COVID has increased immensely. Not just on the bylaw front, but on the building front, probably more so on the building front. Half my job now is issuing orders. Previous to COVID, we issued maybe 6-7 orders a year. We currently have like 35 active building code orders on the go. A lot of those go to court, spend a lot of time in courts, back and forth with lawyers. So that part's really gone up. So that's why we're looking at the bylaw portion of my job instead of it taking a back burner when we're trying to deal with property standards and zoning issues, anything like that. We're trying to look at another solution so that we can accommodate it, but not have a full-time person have to come in who at sometimes might not be totally busy. Second part of the question, what was the second part? Yeah, I rambled a bit. Oh, coming back to council. Yes. So once we do decide which route we want to go, yes. So if we're hiring a new position, that will come back to council.
Follow up, Councillor Byrne.
Just a follow-up, we decided here a little while ago to share assets as far as building code stuff between Kawartha Lakes and ourselves. Would that also be a possibility if it didn't work out with county that we could utilize, because you're doing both right now? I'm guessing that maybe they do both over there too.
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne. Yeah, good point. That is just under building at the moment, but we're looking at any solution possible to the bylaw part. Right now, we're looking with the county because it's come up through CAO meetings with the rest of the county. Yeah, if that doesn't pan out, we'll definitely look at other options. City of Corf Lakes has a full-time bylaw department. I don't know the number of staff. 10 years ago, I know it was about 7. I think they're at about 10 or 12. So they do have a lot of staff. They're unionized there too, which we'd have to get our head around, but we're definitely open to looking at all solutions right now.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Other questions related to bylaw? Or we'll move on with Kimberly? Seeing none. Okay, Kimberly, thank you.
Through you, Chair, we've moved on to Protective Services Fire Department. They have a consolidated increase of 11.9%, which is $107,764. There was a deputy fire chief appointed and approved in the master fire plan report and funding approval in the 2022 budget, but it was only for Q3 because it happened in the fall. So this year is reflective of a full year. The fire call volumes increased over 11% in 2021, with an estimated 6% increase forecasted in 2022. Yep, that's the end. So that's the end of Protective Services.
Questions with regards to protective services? Seeing, oh, Councillor Byrne?
Through you, Chair, just curious to the chief. When that uptick in calls, would that reflect accidents on the 115? Or I'm looking there a while ago, they were telling me that in 2022, we had a large accident increase over the COVID when nobody was driving. I just wonder what that uptick represents, please.
Through the mayor to Councillor Burns, there's, I would summarize it into, oh, sorry, how's that? I would summarize it into 2 categories. So one is your medical calls are going up, and then your second leader would be car accidents, upticks in car accidents.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Edgerton?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the chief here. On your car accidents on 115, I do believe, the thing that's that right, I do believe that the ministry sets a rate that you charge per each unit out there, so it's not really a total loss to the municipality. Would that be correct? Yeah.
Through the mayor to Councillor Edgerton, that is correct. We just received a rate increase in the last, I'm going to say, a couple of months. I believe we're around $5.25 an hour per unit. We're allowed to charge for 3 units when we're at motor vehicle collisions. Those invoices are made and posted, and we collect back through the insurance companies.
To you, Mr. Mayor, the chief, I believe that is charged to the insurance for out of resident people that have an accident, people that live in the municipality, their insurance isn't charged for that. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Councillor Edgerton, a number of years ago, based on legal advice, that policy was revised and changed. We have to charge all motoring public. They have to be treated equal. And so we were instructed that we needed to send, it's a user pay system. So those that are having accidents, we recruit. I think the more important thing that it's an excellent question that the councillor brought up is the public needs to understand or should appreciate that the fire service in Cavan-Monaghan is paid for solely by them. The fire service does not receive any provincial or federal funding for their the service that we provide. And so this is a chargeback because people get, we're being charged for this car accident, but your insurance company is in your policy is charging a premium for that. And all we're doing is collecting back the charges. So again, it's a user pay system, and we're just, it is a revenue generator, but I don't want to mislead anyone. It's more of an operating offset to our operating costs, if I got that out correctly.
Thank you, Chief. Other questions before we move on? Okay, back to you, Ms. Pope. Thank you, Chief.
Just for clarification on the protective services, on our user fees and charges bylaw, we have reference to the actual rates. So when the rates change mid-year, they're automatically adopted, and we don't have to come back to council because we charge the current rate no matter what it is. And we just wait for that official documentation to arrive. The next department is the Public Works Department. They have a consolidated net increase of 8.6%, which is $176,752. And it's primarily attributed to the following: the expansion of the Public Works road staff to 9 routes from 8, and the associated operating costs for subdivision assumed roads. And there's also an increase in cost of materials, cold mix, gravel, calcium chloride, and services.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Questions with regards to Public Works? Seeing none, continue on, please.
Next is the Parks and Facilities Department, has a decrease of 4.6%. That's $57,012. And it's primarily attributed to the following: there's an increase in estimated rental revenue. So that's going to bring in additional income due to the reopening of CMCC and the loosening of the pandemic restrictions. And there's an increase in advertising revenue and contracted services.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. I've noticed the additional advertising revenue while we're in there on Sunday nights, so it's nice to see, and excellent revenue for the township. So congratulations on that for those people in the Parks Department. Mr. Allison, thank you. Questions with regards to that component or that summary? No. Okay. Back to you, Ms. Pope.
Thank you. We have the Office of the CAO, who has an increase of 2.9%, which is $7,071, and it's primarily attributed to grid indexing for wages and benefits.
Questions? Back to you, Ms. Pope.
The Office of the Clerk has an increase of 10.5%, $25,551, which is primarily attributed to grid indexing, wages and benefits.
Seeing no questions, continue on.
The Finance Department and Information Technology has an increase of 3%, $8,933, primarily attributed to increase in cost of software licensing and support with minimal IT reserves, and reduced grant utilized to offset a contract position for implementation of the financial software and integration between departments.
Questions for Ms. Pope's department? Seeing none, very good. Move on. Thank you.
The council budget has an increase of 23.1%. That's $43,330, primarily attributed to grid indexing and benefit premium adjustments, council training, and the availability of a $2,200 rollover per council member to ensure all members have opportunity to attend a hybrid, online or in-person for municipal conference as per the maximums that were established in the council remuneration bylaw 2022-30.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. In regards to this component, I mean, obviously 23 seems like a large increase, but we always do this every year to make sure that new council has the opportunity to attend the conferences. And so obviously we've just had the one, there's another one coming up later this month, and then there's AMO and OEMC later this month. So my understanding or my recollection is if we all don't attend those conferences, then the rollover is maintained against the next year's budget, which would traditionally be reduced because there's not the expectation. I believe is it 2 or 1 conference that we're able to attend as a municipality in normal years? 2?
Thank you. Through you, just for clarity, because the mayor and the deputy mayor sit on county council, so yours goes down to 1, but everyone else has 2. So that's why I just couldn't answer that one directly. And yes, we would roll forward those funds to offset the next year. And this does historically happen, but it's once in the 4-year term. And we always offer in the first year that you can attend all 4. Unfortunately, costs have gone up. So we've recognized that all 4 in person actually exceeds the bylaw. So we've placed in the budget what the bylaw maximums are. So we'll deal with that if that happens. But if you did some sort of a hybrid and in person, we might be able to meet like the bylaw maximums, but we'll have to see.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Questions of Deputy Mayor Huntley and then Councillor Byrne?
Through you, Chair. I guess it does say 4 for everybody. Have you taken into account the fact that the mayor and deputy mayor have only 3? Okay.
Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair, I'm having a dilemma, trying to lead by example. I'm having an issue with this grid thing for me. And I'm wondering if there's a way of opting out of it or what's involved there.
The grid was established by bylaw and was in place at the time of your election. Therefore, what's there is set. If council wants to consider and look at the bylaw and make any changes that might have to be done for future year budget allocations. There's also a legal implication because when something is formed as part of your employment contract and then taking it away. So it's not a simple answer that I can provide. But as council moves through this year, and if that's a policy that you want to look at and have revised, that is something that you can ask for us to do, and we will definitely follow through.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, of the 23% increase, what would be attributed to grid indexing? Do you have that offhand?
I don't have it offhand, but once we take a break, I can definitely do the calculations quickly and provide it back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. I think we'll continue on through the rest of the departments, and then I was going to take a break at that point, so then we can give you a few minutes to come back with that answer. So why don't we, I think we're on conservation and authorities, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. We have the conservation and authorities. All have been received. I know there's a member of council on each of those boards, so they might be able to speak to it more in depth. However, consolidated between all of them, the increase is 4.8%, $5,187 as all the 2023 levies have been received. Committees of council has an increase of 41.5%, but again, we have to put the number beside it so you realize that's actually only a $4,226 increase overall. It is primarily attributed to extending the MRHAC Shared Heritage Coordinator contract position. We have applied for a grant that was there in 2022, which expires in March of 2023. We are hopeful that we might have additional funding, but of course we don't know that at this time. So therefore we can't apply it within the budget at this time. And then police and contracted services has a budget estimate of approximately 3.3%, $46,016. And it's primarily both the police contract and the insurance premiums that are pushing that. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Pope, but the police and the contracted services bit, I know that they've been taken over and doing a bit of the bylaw enforcement. I'm wondering if there'll be an offset if we get a bylaw enforcement officer put in place.
I wouldn't be the person to speak to that. I'll have to refer to either bylaw or the CAO.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Huntley. Currently, the only thing the police are enforcing right now is noise. We kind of knew that it was in their agreement that they would enforce noise, so there wouldn't be a big offset because my main roles in bylaw that a new position would be doing would be the big ones are property standards and zoning are the main ones that take up the most time. Parking, currently we only tow and tag, which isn't a big part of it either, but we are looking at moving to parking tickets. That would be a big increase. So how that works with the police and bylaw and how that's shared might be an opportunity for more revenue, but would need further discussion where we go.
Councillor Edgerton.
You say that the police are gonna do the tagging and towing. I do believe that the road department, if they want to move cars for snowplowing, they can do that. Can they not?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Edgerton. That's correct. Yep. So currently there is the roads department. Most of the time it's a tag and then they're gone. There are several instances where we've had to tow. The roads department can do that during the day. If it's not a snow related issue, then that usually falls upon myself. So the police only get involved if it's a non-snow related issue and it's after hours is when they don't get involved. And that's pretty few and far in between right now. When the new subdivision comes on, there's definitely going to be some more parking with all the townhouses and everything, some more parking issues there that we'll have to figure out.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Do you want to continue on through environmental tax rate and wastewater, Ms. Pope? And then we'll take the break.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, the environmental tax rate, the budget includes a total levy increase of $98,345 for the operational costs within each ward, waste programs, landfill monitoring, and transfer station expenses without any additional grant funding available to offset the kitchen waste collection program. And in addition, the waste collection contract was tendered in 2022. However, due to substantial increased costs, staff recommended on a public works report to extend the present contract that we have with Withers Waste. And we proposed those changes. Those changes were estimated at that time with a report of just under $20,000 deficit we might hit by the end of 2022. We've actually hit less than 4,000, which is a good alternate. However, we weren't sure exactly how that would play out. This budget equals an environmental tax rate increase of $4.93 per 100,000 of current value assessment. Therefore, on a property of $400,000, the tax rate increase would be $19.72.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Questions with regards to the environmental tax rate? Okay, on to wastewater.
Water and wastewater, it's presented using the water and wastewater financial plan rate study and the user fees and charges bylaw, which is in association with the 2022 Watson Associates rate study analysis and the user fees and charges from 2022-67. Any remaining funds at the end of the year are always transferred back to the water and wastewater reserves for future years for capital and or operations. This is included in all the calculations in the analysis when we're determining the user rates. The water service is user paid and does not affect the municipal tax rate.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pope. Questions on water wastewater? Councilor Byrne?
Just for clarification through the chair, the staff, and we hire the city of Peterborough to monitor. Is that part of the tax levy or does that go to the user base?
All costs are covered under the user fees and charges bylaw. That's a contractor service that we pay. Everything is included, and we even have a small allocation of one of our staff members over into that department. I just can't remember offhand. Again, paid for by water wastewater because those duties are water wastewater related. We keep them very separate.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. So were there any remaining funds at the end of the year?
We just closed the year on the 31st and opened up 2023. So I'll have further analysis and I can come back at the final report and let you know where we stand.
Excellent. Okay, I'm seeing no more questions with regards to this, so we're going to take a 10-minute break to allow Ms. Pope to do that calculation, and then we'll return for further discussions on the capital. Thank you. Yeah, it was just, I don't know if it was just, I was doing it. Hold on, I hit priority first, you're gonna let it. All right, we're back from our recess and we'll recommence the meeting. Ms. Pope, you're going to take us through the summaries of the capital.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Council. I'm just actually going to provide an update on the Council, the request about the wages and the benefits. So the wages have increased 9,500 in total, which is a 7% increase as per the indexing. And the benefits overall have increased 9,800, and that's actually gone up 31%. However, when you look at previous council to current council, there's all sorts of areas there that also determine that. For example, in Manulife, if you are an individual under coverage versus family, it's a different pricing point there. So I won't disclose who and what, but just there were some differences before and differences now. And so not necessarily being that that's a hike or increase in, it's more to do with the change that's occurred. Does that answer your question? Okay, so the 2023 capital budget as presented, I did discuss earlier in the summary of the changes. So if the levy were to be left at 5.1%, we're looking at a net capital levy of expenditures of $3,893,539, or sorry, $3,893,539. We can go through the next section here, but that's basically what was reported before about the previous approvals of capital infrastructure projects that we were carrying forward. The Parks and Public Works Millbrook Depot that was completed in 2022, Cavan Public Works Operations Center ongoing, and the Fire and Ambulance Station ongoing. As per the last meeting, there were pre-approvals for 3 vehicles in total. The first motion was to replace the John Deere grader and the new International tandem, and the second, the Main Street water main and road works. So they were discussed and approved at the last meeting. There were grant applications previously approved, listed there. That's the same information that you received on the first draft of the report as well. The Municipal Modernization Program grant application, that's also there as well. Same information that you received first draft hasn't changed. It's because we're rolling over the funds and still working on those projects. The COVID fiscal impact update has been updated to provide the operating costs of $16,023 that was in the GL at the time of this report. So that means that the overall cost and pressures from COVID is $593,410. And then the next section is about the May 21st storm fiscal impact update. And again, we've pulled in the funds right up to what's sitting in the GL, and it's at $100,350 between May 21st and December 31st. As a reminder, we had to hit a 3% on our levy in order to apply for the municipal disaster recovery assistance. Because 100,000 is less than the 325,000 minimum, we were unable to apply and did not receive any reimbursement for those. Stabilization of the taxation and asset replacement. So again, we are at phase 3, but just a recap of the success of previous council and staff and the hard work in the past. We were able to remove the OLG revenues from the operating budget back in 2013. We were able to remove it from the capital budget completely in 2015. And each year we keep a priority to fund the asset replacement reserve through the property tax base, and are asking in this report, if it were left at 5.1%, it would be 100%. But we know that we're discussing some further potential cuts today. Reserve and reserve funds, you will have a 2022 estimated updated balance for the next report. Like I said, yesterday we closed off the year, so we'll be able to pull in some data and provide you an update. The reserve sheet that you were provided in this draft is the same that you received in the first draft and has not changed. The following are the attachments. We'll just go through some of the attachments. Municipal tax rates. So I think I'll just take a few moments to pause on this screen and perhaps go through it in a little bit more detail. And if there's any questions or clarification that you would require. The first column is the RTC, it's the realty tax class. That's what's assessed after the building permits have been processed. Building permits are always updated to MPAC on a monthly basis. Then MPAC takes a look at the property and the information that they receive, and they assess which realty tax class, whether it be commercial, industrial, farm, managed forest, residential, or exempt. Then there's a realty tax qualifier, and that indicates, okay, now that you have a realty tax class, what kind of property do you have? Do you have excess land? Do you have full taxable? Are there any special exemptions? Is there utility? So that's what the RTQ represents. So we have tax rates for all of those classes and all of those qualifiers. Then MPAC provides us a roll total. This is an update to you today from the first draft, because this is the actual roll total. Then we take it, we multiply that by the tax ratio and the tax rate reduction. Tax ratios are set at the county level, and then across the board, the tax rate reduction would occur if there was excess land. So for example, you see 0.7 on the second line. So instead of paying the same as commercial full at 1, you're paying 70% of that value. If we go down, you'll see farmland. You'll hear farmers talk about the OMAFRA program and the farm tax reduction. That's another program. You have to maintain your financial status and continue to report to them. But if you are eligible, it would be submitted to us that you are qualifying in the farm tax program. And if that's the case, then your farming land would be assessed in that. Now, as a reminder, the home and 1 acre of the property is always residential full. So that doesn't change for the farmer. What changes is all the excess property that they deem is used for the operation of farming. And so when you see 0.25, they're paying 25% of the residential rate on those portions. So one of the myths or incomplete information is that a farmer only pays 25% on their home, which is not accurate. The farmer pays residential at the full rate on their home and 1 acre, and then the additional lands that are part of their farming operation are at the 25%. So that's just clarification on what tax ratios and tax rate reductions mean. So that results in the weighted assessment. So you see there, I have a weighted assessment, and therefore we multiply it, excuse me, by the tax rate, and then it results in the actual taxes. So this year, based on the actual roll total, we anticipate to bring in 11, well, pending an approval of a tax rate. So as I speak today, I am speaking to the 5.1, but the final will receive all the adjustments or changes made today. So the 11,237,800 is generated based on the weighted assessment, and that would approximately be a 5.1% increase. So overall, a $35.87 change for every 100,000 of assessment. Any questions on that particular page? Nope. Okay, we'll move to the next one. So the environmental tax rates, it follows the exact same format. We try to keep things similar so that you can do comparisons or what have you. But again, it's the same role, it's the same taxation. So overall in total with the environmental rates, we're bringing in $431,988. You'll see this reflected in the budget. And the actual increase, it says 21%, but it's much smaller base. But to put it in perspective, that's $4.93 increase as presented today. Any questions on that page? No. Budget summary has a lot going on behind the scenes, a lot of calculations and a lot of links, but this is just to provide you with an overview on the left-hand side. You're seeing what it costs for operating in capital if we were to go forward with no funding from anywhere else. And so you can see there that the 10,000 or 10 million under the operating, the capital at 9 million, that would be significant to adhere to. However, on the right-hand side, you'll see tax levy, provincial federal grants, DCs or reserve funds, user fees and other revenue. So all those sources come into play to reduce what we need to go out to the taxpayer for. And then the net difference is your center line there, which is the tax levy. So that's what we're raising through the taxes for each department in this current budget as presented today. Partway down, you'll see where it says less on the left-hand side, less 2022 capital rollovers. That's reported on the capital rollover sheet. Future budget pre-approvals, that was what was included in the previous draft. And then we're estimating a 400,000 surplus, but again, we just closed the year yesterday and we'll be working on that. That number may or may not change between now and the final draft, but it is an estimate. So that brings that $19 million total down to 16 million. And then when you go further down, we have other aspects where we receive funding. So the OMPF, which is center, and it shows for 535,900. That's the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. That is applied across all departments. That's not specific for one, and it's applied in operations. And so that is basically to try their partnership fund to partner with us to help us deliver our services. So that's applied in the operating budget. The Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corp, that's back to the slots and the revenue that we received there. Any money that we received there goes to offset the $2.4 million that we show on the reserve sheet that has come down for the CMCC. When we went out to tender, the 15 million became 17.4, and that's how that's funded. So those funds won't be available for anything else till after that. It's been paid in full. Then we go down, you have federal gas tax, which has been renamed now to the Canadian Community Building Fund, Canada Community Building Fund. That 292,188 is applied in the capital budget, and it's specific to roads projects and identified on the capital budget as well. And then the special charges of 445, that comes from the summary below showing you the environmental and the Millbrook levy, the BIA levy. The Millbrook BIA levy is an in and an out. It's placed on the tax bill received, and then we hand it over to the BIA. There's no cost within our tax rate for that. They're actually charged separately on the tax bill. Are there any questions about this page? Okay, so attachment number 4 was the detailed operating or detailed and summary operating budget pages, which we've talked about the summary already. Library has presented their report. So therefore, we can go to the capital. And that's attachment number 6 if you're pulling it up separately. And this is the capital page, probably under the capital tab. It's attachment number 6 and after 47 in the agenda, if you're looking at it in the agenda. We did go through in detail. I have summarized again at the beginning of this report the changes made at the budget committee level with staff. However, if there's further discussion.
Thanks, Ms. Pope. So there, the capital before you, there was one, I think there's 2 adjustments that I think that was probably due to my miscommunication at the finance committee meeting that we just wanted to correct. So bring everyone's attention. So I'm just going to wait 1 minute so we're all on the same pages here, and then we can talk you through some of the adjustments. You got a couple? Okay, I think we're getting there. So just stay with me. You're right. So the first adjustment's nothing earth shattering. So it was the intention. So if you go to planning and building and ECDev, and you'll see the corporate strategic plan, that 25,000, the intention was that is actually not a transfer to reserve, but a requested purchase. So that 25,000 in the transfer reserve specific column would move over to the requested purchase column, because the intention is to start that at the end of the year. So it's not a transfer to reserve. It's actually going to be, the intention is to use that reserve in this year. just so we're clear. So that was my mistake, but just so everyone's on board. So that is actually being spent this year. Doesn't affect the levy because it's already being taxed or collected. It's just not going to reserve. It's going to be spent this year. That was the one error. And then the other thing, so after a conversation with Councillor Edgerton, I did some follow-up at the county meeting, and the EV charger electric vehicle program is actually not moving forward at this time. It was a Selwyn project that they were trying to garner enough sufficient support for some grant support, and I guess they didn't get it. So that $10,000 does not actually need to be raised by the levy any longer. So sorry for that delay, but I just got that information yesterday. So we're living and learning in real time here. And then the last adjustment that I had that was I'll take full responsibility for is actually on the next page in parks and facilities. So if you notice, there is on line number 8, that Maple Leaf Park playground equipment was actually supposed to be redistributed into the transfer to reserves for that equipment. As you remember, when we talked about it at the last budget meeting, we're going to wait to get the feedback from that survey and then figure out what we're going to do and spend the money on. So that 95,000 is intended to be redistributed into the splash pad and to the playground equipment. I believe when we spoke, Ms. Page, that was going to be in the amounts of 59,000 for the park or playground equipment, and then a further, sorry, 90,000, correct, for the splash pad. So that was how it was supposed to be presented. It was my mistake that it wasn't, so I apologize for that in advance. So that is where we're at the current state, but I know there's a couple of things that certain members of staff will, oh, sorry, there is one more. Ms. Pope, do you want to speak to that one? Sorry.
Thank you. Of course, at the 11th hour, we received finally the 2021 approved international tandem invoice, and there were surprise charges on there that I know the Public Works Director is working with vendor to try to reconcile. However, there's $16,000 more needed. So we're asking council to consider increasing that from the 292. So that's the second one up from the bottom, replace 2007. Yeah. And so it was originally at 292. So we're asking for 308. We do have the 292 as a rollover. So the net ask on the right will be $16,000. And the Public Works Director is here to answer any questions if you have any about that. But that was the only other change that I was aware of.
Mr. Hancock, would you like to speak to the $16,000 adjustment and just explain that to the rest of council?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, we did receive the invoice for the vehicle. This is a vehicle that we tendered in 2021. We carried over the funds in 2022. And again, we've carried them over into 2023. We did receive the invoice from Winslow Geronimo, excuse me. That always hangs me up, but and I have spoken to the owner on that. We basically have, he's said in his comment, first of all, the costs are attributed to, one is the increased costs of steel, which is part of the Viking invoice. It's actually the plow mount on the front and part of of course, the truck itself. And the second is a commodity, and it's actually an increase of shipping costs and whatnot coming across the border. He indicated to us that he's already been paying, he's paid about $6,000 in the interest fees on it sitting at the Vikings yard in Kingston. These costs he cannot absorb, and it is a cost. He did tell us that the model is a 2023, so we do pick up a year on the model, but he says it's strictly COVID and it's strictly cost of materials, and he cannot absorb them because he's already absorbed a large amount himself already. But at this point in time, the increase, and it's an invoice with us, and it's based on the original carryover amount, and that's, I think, just part of the industry at this point.
So just to reiterate, Mr. Hancock, so there's been increased charges while the vehicle has been waiting at the Viking lot for being fully equipped as to what we expect it to be. But in addition to that, we're also getting a year newer machine than we initially tendered 2 years ago. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it is.
Thank you for that. Okay, so what that means is that we've just removed the 10,000 EV because that's no longer happening. So my suggestion would be that we reallocate the 10,000 from that program in this budget towards the majority of the $16,000 portion that Mr. Hancock is looking for that equipment. And then in addition, there's still the 6,000 remaining that we just need to solve the riddle on. And my suggestion is that we could reduce the allocations to the reserves for either the Public Works, or sorry, the Maple Leaf Park and or the splash pad equipment by the 6,000 to get fulfillment, so that there's actually what that would result in is no actual changes to the capital request. We will have accommodated all of the capital budget before us today without changing the levy one bit. So I'm willing, is there any other questions or any comments? So that's sort of where we will be at theoretically right now. If we want to solve that riddle, I can make that motion at some point, but there might be other things that we want to discuss in this capital budget. So let's just park that for now and think it's just, so I'm sorry about those adjustments, but now we're all on the same page currently where we're at. And then we can have a discussion about any of the capital before us today. So questions for the capital budget? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, back to this, the tandem. I'm still struggling with how they can pass the cost of doing business onto us. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, if we had a contract with them and we had an invoice with them and we had a tender with them, they have to absorb that risk, but they've just passed it all on to us. Like, have we negotiated with them at all to say maybe half of it, or like we're really just taking it, which I don't think is right. Like,
Mr. Hancock.
Through Mr. Mayor to the Deputy Mayor, I did have a conversation with Steve, who is the owner, and he has indicated, I did ask him if he would absorb the whole cost. I did ask him if he'd absorb 50%, because I felt it was unreasonable to the municipality. He said in his comments that he has lost upwards of 10,000 himself on the deal because of costs that he did not see. And if he goes back to anyone in the industry, they will not absorb it. They are basing it on material increases over this time period. And there is no, I asked him, there's no alternative. So he is not willing to absorb anything at this time. And I commented that we're going out to a tender with a new vehicle here right at this present time. And, we're going to look at options to try and make sure this doesn't happen. And he says he does not think you will find it in the industry where there aren't increases in vehicles. And he says that's happening in the small vehicles. It's happening in the large vehicles. And if it takes a period of time and the increase comes in during that period of time, the buyer's expected to pay. That was a comment he made, but I did go back and say, I wanted you to absorb part or all. And he says he cannot this time.
through you, Charlie, I'm still struggling with that. I mean, if I bought and paid for something and it took a little bit longer than normal for it to arrive, and it suddenly it costs more, I have to absorb that. Like, how do you function like as a business owner? Like, I don't know how you do that and expect to have returning clients. And if the entire industry is functioning that way, I mean, that's, you put down money for a car and it just shows up whenever it shows up, and it's going to cost you a lot more just because it's going to cost you a lot more. Like, I don't understand. This economy doesn't make sense to me.
Again, I understand your comment, and I think I raised the issue. And I said it's a little unfair to us as a purchaser. We had not expended any money, so we did not put a deposit, but we did have a contract, as you might call, entered into. We did have a purchase order issued. We just did not have delivery. And he says that he understands the comment, he understands the question, but he cannot control national and international prices, and that is a problem. And it's been rapid, as we know, through the lumber costs, material costs. So if there's a steel increase and you go back to them and say you got to absorb that, they're not doing that. That's the gist in the industry. And in particular in large vehicles and equipment, prices have gone up drastically. I've quoted them going up 50, 100% on materials, and no one is taking any of that back. They're just saying that is the price to do business. So at this point in time, we cannot take the vehicle, which we wait 2 years for, or we pay the additional 15,900. I've gone back and I don't think we can look at it legally. I don't think that we'll find out that we have to pay the 15,900 to get the vehicle. We will try and lock up tender documents, but if delivery dates are 2 years out on equipment, the cost of doing business will show up in that 2 years. And I think that's just the way it is. And my comment is it's happening across the industry. I don't think it's just tandem trucks. It's every piece of equipment. I watched half-ton trucks. Vehicles have gone from a typical 55 to 60,000. Most of them are at 100,000, and that's ridiculous. And they talk about salaries and how you pay for that. No one's doing that. Can't. The cost of lumber may be coming down now, but at one point it was up 50%. Steel it's gone up 100%. So these things I understand, and we will raise it, but right now he's saying he cannot absorb it.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. It's a grim reality of municipal procurement, I guess, is what we're saying. And we all know that the realities of supply chain constraints and obviously materials, as you mentioned. But I mean, like you said, we have been waiting 2 years for this vehicle. And as much as I agree with Deputy Mayor Huntley on the principles of it don't make a lot of sense at the end of the day, I'm sure there's a laundry list of other municipalities that if there was a vehicle that was ready for purchase would jump at whatever increase they could accumulate or market it for. It wouldn't last long on the lot. So I guess what we're intending to fund with the 16,000 is that the expectation that Mr. Hancock will continue to have these conversations, hopefully to a better result of a lesser amount than the 16,000, but without approval for the 16,000, they're not going to give us the truck, is the brass tacks, unfortunately. Is that a fair summary, Mr. Hancock?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it is.
Questions about Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you then, do we have to do a pre-approval for the release of 16,000 for you to get the truck off the lot, or do you have to wait to the end of February now? Because we had to wait till the end of February, will it increase more?
I think in fairness, this company he's been dealing with us for a number of years. We bought a number of vehicles off him. He has the truck to be delivered on Friday, but he has an invoice that shows that amount. And I've argued about the amount, and he's come back with his position. He's not going to hold the truck up on us, but ultimately he is expecting to be paid. So he will not sit on the truck. It will be hopefully in our parking lot by Friday.
Councillor Nacho.
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Hancock. Moving forward then, could something, a codicil or something be put into the contract that stipulates that if we do not receive the vehicle by whatever date that they said that it would be made available, that there's an actual financial penalty to the supplier? Because this will happen, you have incentives in the construction industry where people will say, come in on time, come in on budget, you'll get a performance bonus. Every day that you're late afterward, you're subject to cost, so that we're not going to be incurring this. And in addition, if we could have some kind of legal vernacular written into this that states who's liable for this or not, so that it's just not, cut and dry, it's handed over as an expense to us.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Latchoff, the first point is that we do carry a penalty clause in our contracts presently. Most suppliers will indicate in their bids that they cannot comply to that because they cannot lock into a delivery date. And that's happening across the industry. So unless things change where we used to get equipment within 6 months or within 5 months, we set dates that we expect delivery. In these particular cases, in particular with the tandem trucks, it was running at a 2-year period. So we do carry that, but when they bid it, they will comment they cannot comply to that, and they'll ask for a waiver of the liability clause. The second part of it is I certainly can reach out for legal on it, but I have talked to other purchasers, I guess the county and other purchasers, and they are paying the premium because they see that as part of the industry. So we can ask for a legal on this. We can certainly advise council.
As a follow-up to this subject, Ms. Hurley, did you want to speak to it? As much as I wish the reality were different, I think it is a reality, unfortunately, like you mentioned, it's not just a unique circumstance with this vendor. Is there, whereas what we kind of have what Councillor Natchoff was proposing. I guess one of my questions is, and it may be kind of slightly different, but in the same pursuit, is if we're going to have delivery delays of a year or 2 years, is there maybe a potential clause that we can include in our procurement that, you know, if it's a 365 and we haven't received delivery, that we ask these vendors for an updated estimate on the additional costs, and that they commit and bond themselves to that update, even if it happens to be an additional year. So we're kind of meeting halfway through the delivery period for these longer procurement processes like we're experiencing now. That maybe there's an upstream solution that cuts this sort of exposure from, you know, a final invoice solution to a somewhere in the middle solution where we can try to cap these sorts of associated costs. Not that it'll be bindable, but that we're trying to work with them as best we can and maybe create some sort of clause in our procurement that they will actually be amenable to, and reducing the costs on both of us potentially.
To Mr. Mayor, I think that's fair. We could carry the clause and we can ask them to update it if it's a long-term delivery. We're hoping that the term becomes less than a year, and you know, that's maybe wishful thinking. But on the point of a lot of the suppliers don't really know their costs till they get to the final build. So we can ask them if it's going to be a 2-year delivery, at least give us a 12-month update on costs. That's a fair comment. I think they will try. The problem, and I even spoke to Steve on this, I said, how come we didn't know in the start of 2022 that we were looking at this increased cost? He said he wasn't advised himself. So that's part of the problem. But that being said, we can still put it in the tender.
Ms. Hurley and then Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to council, I think Mr. Hancock sort of answered that question. Looking forward, we can sort of plan. No one foreseen that we were going to wait 2 years for this truck. There are out clauses, there's financial clauses and tenders, there's all of those kind of things that we try to ensure that we have. They all, most of them, especially if they're very large, you know, we do seek legal advice on how best to do it. What I can tell you when it comes to construction, not necessarily ordering a vehicle, but even if you have these clauses in your agreements under, you know, the Construction Act, etc., they're very challenging, even though you feel that you have more of a case. When you know, weigh out the legal costs, the time, and you know, the situation itself, each one is different, but they are very, very challenging. But this one is already done. I mean, we did this 2 years ago. We're in a situation, the funds are sitting there. There is an additional, but given the circumstances over the 2 years and the increases that everything's, you know, we've gone through with COVID and all these increases that we seem to borne. When we do seek out legal and we have talked to other municipalities, everyone is sort of dealing with the same thing, and it ends up coming down to, if you don't want the vehicle, someone else will take the vehicle.
Through you, Mayor, to Ms. Hurley.
Sorry, Lance. Hold on. I did it. I think Deputy Mayor Huntley was next, if I'm not mistaken. And then I'll go to you. No problem.
Through you, Chair, just to comment on your comment about about having you know, them come back along the way to give you updates. You're putting a procurement hat on. I mean, that kind of signals to them that you're willing to accept price increases. So you really don't want to send that one. So it's kind of, you know, leave it with legal, let them figure out those clauses. But yeah, fortunately.
Councillor Natchoff.
Through you, Mayor. Should then moving forward, we include something where we just have the anticipation of a built-in additional cost, so that we're not going to have this continually happening if we do purchase, you know, we're going to be continually purchasing larger equipment over the years. Should we put an automatic 10% expectation of increase?
Through you, council. It's a really good question, and we do have contingency clauses in our documentation. I think this was sort of, when we deal with construction development, it's quite common to do those. when we're dealing with purchasing a vehicle and you do a tender for a certain vehicle, whatever that, it's usually cut and dry. Like it's usually, we don't usually have this type of increase. But the world is changed since COVID, and there are some additional costs that are going crazy with pricing and unforeseen costs. So it's something we would definitely consider moving forward. It's unusual for us to ever have this. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, just for clarity, you've ordered a 2021 truck and are getting a 2023 truck?
For clarity, it's you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. It was 2022. The one we're getting is a 2023.
We will see when it hopefully shows up on Friday, depending the outcome of some of the decisions we're about to make. So I'm sure Wayne will be taking photos with it if it all goes his way today. Ms. Pope.
Based on the delivery and the anticipated, they won't release the truck unless we do cut a check for that additional 16,000. We would need a motion today for pre-approval so that we can move forward. Otherwise, he would have to wait till after February the 21st.
Okay, so we may as well carve that portion out and make that decision here. So as a part of the motion I was proposing is the moving of the 10,000 for the EV program that's no longer occurring, and then a reduction in the transfers to those two reserves for the Parks and Rec reserves for the splash pad and the Maple Leaf Park fixtures of $6,000 to make up the 16,000. So unless someone has an alternative opinion, I'm willing to make that motion to fund for pre-approval funding for that allocation to the truck purchase, and looking for a seconder. Councillor Natchoff, any questions about that motion or funding it that way? Please, we're good.
Through Mr. Mayor to Ms. Pope, do we need any GLs or allocations other than that motion?
No, just reference to the 2023 budget with the addition of the $16,000 to approve that line item, which is the 1907.
Very good. So that's the motion, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Good luck with your negotiations, Mr. Hancock. We'll look forward to a fulsome report. Okay. So we've made that allocation. Other questions with regards to other components of the capital budget. So we've got that off the books now. We haven't made a motion for the reallocations of those funds. So that's just kind of in the ether right now. We've talked, other than removing 6,000 of it towards that. So anyways, other questions about any of the finance or any of the capital departments here? Or do you want me to keep going? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, just as a point of clarity on the corporate strategic plan, I believe we pulled it forward instead of putting in reserve, but I believe our motion actually put another 25,000 into a commitment for the next year. Do we have to change that at this point to just this 25,000 now?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Deputy Mayor, yes, the motion, and I think Ms. Pope mentioned it, was 25,000 for this year and then 25,000 for 2024. Let me just go back in the report. Depending upon how it reads, it said 25,000 capital reduction for corporate strategic plan be funded over 2 years with a pre-approval for 2024 capital budget of 50. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you wish to allocate 25,000 in total for the project. Want a motion for that, Ms. Pope? Yes, I figured. We would need a motion for that, sir.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor Huntley.
So before I make that motion, do we have to rescind the previous motion or are we good going?
Through you, Deputy Mayor Huntley, through the mayor. No, we do not need to rescind that. We're going to have clean motions for all of this. We can just keep the story as we go on.
Deputy Mayor, would you like to make that motion?
Sure, I'll make the motion that we allocate the 25,000 this year and we just leave it at that. Does that clean it up or do we have to say anything else?
I believe that is clean, Ms. Page.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Pope, do we need to reallocate that $25,000 or does it just disappear? Perfect. We're good then, Mayor.
Looking for a seconder for Deputy Mayor's motion. Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is carried. So we've cleaned up that matter. Thanks very much for that. Good catch, Deputy Mayor Huntley. Other questions with regards to the capital budget? So I have a couple if I don't see any hands at this moment. So as of right now, with all of the changes that we've made, we still haven't made any headway from the reduction outside of the library reduction, which I believe Ms. Pope said is about 0.48% of the levy reduction, which is 51,312. So by my math, and bear with me, Ms. Pope, I go to you on these, that would mean that to make the 3% target, we would need an additional cut of $162,688, approximately. Ms. Pope?
I just want to make sure the total amount you're including the library operating reduction from what they had in this budget. So that's a 21,503 reduction, and the library capital, because they were originally asking for the 16,559 down. So that's a $29,559. So that is a 0.48 reduction. Yeah. So then the net difference to get to your 3%, you're correct.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. So in solving the riddle and trying to get to a reasonable target, I don't know if everyone has their own, but one of the areas that we traditionally are always pursuing the full allocation to is the asset replacement reserve. So as you can see here at the top, right now as it stands, we have $2.68047, which is 100% of the asset management reserve replacement. We, as it says earlier in the document, I think last year it was we're always pursuing fulfilling this. And I think right now, based on where we've at our total depreciation, we're at about 80%. And last year, with regards to our contributions in 2022, it was around just over the $2 million mark that we allocated. So what I'm willing to propose or wanted to float for consideration is that if the 162,688 is what we need to reduce to get to a 3% levy, that is approximately a 1.26% of a tax levy percent. So that what we need is the same amount. So to get a 1.62 tax levy percent, all we would need to do, or what we could consider doing, is reducing the asset replacement reserve contribution from 2.608047 million, 93.38 or 93.4% of the AAR would free up over $163,000. So by doing that, we are putting away approximately just over $2.45 million towards the AAR, and then we're able to bring the levy down to a 3%. So we're increasing the contributions over last year by over $400,000. So we're making more headway, and we're actually almost identical and slightly higher than our contribution would have been to ARR in 2021. So that's sort of where I'm thinking is a fairly healthy number to get to 93.38%. I don't know if we've ever been that high that I can remember in the last 4 years. So that's quite a healthy contribution in my experience. I know Ms. Pope likes numbers higher than 90, and as long as we're above 80, we're still making progress towards that target. And I think it's really important, as much as I kind of wanted to figure out a way to contribute more to the general working reserve, which has been the one reserve that's the most flexible, that we're always trying to replenish after we've done some of these larger expenses, knowing that the ARR is going to have more elements of municipal infrastructure added to it in the next few years, especially 2025, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's kind of important that we prioritize replenishing it while we can at the rate that we can, because as soon as the more inventories are added to that, or more fixtures and assets and infrastructure are added to that, where we might be closer to 90-91%, we're going to fall back because it's just added more things that were a part of the ARR before. and that's a legislative requirement. Ms. Pope, do you want to speak to that at all, or is that's sort of my high level summary, but I didn't know if you had any comments on that sort of approach.
Sure, through you, Chair, to Council, just for the benefit of new council, asset replacement, although legislatively that we need to manage our assets, there's no particular exact percentage or dollar value that is required because each municipality is struggling on their own to handle that. What we put in place a number of years ago during our phases of reducing the OLG is we said, whatever we're currently using, we should at least be replacing that or trying to target to replace that. So what I bring you every year is 100% of the depreciation or amortization value. So that's basically what we used. It's as of the last financial statements. So this is 2 years ago. It's not 2022. Obviously, it hasn't been audited. So this is the 2021 value. So basically, you're trying to put away those dollars because you've used that much of your current assets. When you bring on new assets, so the 2 new builds, Cavan Works Yard and the Fire Hall, they're going to come on in 2023. They'll be part of the 2023 fiscal year end and the financial statements and audit. That will be available to us for 2024 and 2025, and we'll know how much the increase is there. So that's what we've been using as our benchmark. Is that legislated? No. But do we have to put funds aside for asset replacement? Yes. And if we lived in a perfect world, this would have happened every year. We would have fully funded at 100%. And then when you are purchasing a vehicle, you have the full dollar value except inflation. But we don't live in a perfect world, and no municipality is at that target. So we continue to have the benchmark, but as we know, when we get down to the final cuts, we do push back, and it's just part of the environment we're in at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. So we're happy to entertain. I guess we could make a motion. So I think it would, and I was going to ask Ms. Pope about this. It might make sense to break it into 2 motions because I don't think we've actually had a motion on the transfer to reserves for Maple Leaf Park and the splash pad water fixtures. So we're kind of at that point where we can if we want to make that decision with regards to those transfers, well, that means that money is then bound to there, and then we can have a discussion about the ARR. But I don't want to make that motion if there's other things that people would like to discuss in the capital, because once we do, we kind of lose that flexibility other than taking more away from the asset replacement reserve. And I'm quite happy with a 93-94% contribution to that reserve. So I don't want to bind us in by going one at a time if there's discussion to have on either part of it. Does that make sense? So open the floor for any questions before I make that motion. Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, just for clarity, this 100% for the asset replacement, what's the track record over the last 5 years as far as council getting those numbers?
Through the chair to council, could we go back to my report and go to the very last page of the actual report, just before the signatures? Stabilized taxation, asset replacement, keep going. Right there. So you'll see there on phase 3, that's the removal of the OLG revenues as the primary source. So since 2016, we have transferred greater than 80% of the annual audited depreciation to ARR, including all transfers to date from 2012 to 2022. Because you have to remember, assets weren't recorded or on the books for any municipality prior to 2008. So we began this transfer in 2012 with a modest $200,000 and have increased over the years. So the cumulative total that we've been able to put in there is 18 million. Now, of course, when you watch your capital budgets coming forward, we're pulling down what we've put in there. So if there's a truck and we've had 80% of the asset replacement and it's within that 12 years, we're pulling 80% down to fund it. And you see that in the asset replacement reserve transfers inside the capital budget. So that represents now we're at about 83% overall so far, but you have to remember in the first years, 2012, 2013, we would be down 200,000 is minimal. So you'd be a 1% or a 5% or what have you. So some years have been greater, some years less. The last 5 years, we've been 80% or higher, closer to 84, 85. That's where we're trying to get to. And the mayor was correct that as we add new assets, well, they're going to depreciate. And that depreciation is now going to be reflected in our financial statements, and we're going to be, because you can't move forward and purchase new assets that you can't afford. You have to be able to afford the assets you have today before you purchase new assets. So we're trying to maintain the assets that we currently have. And that's the reason why we're doing it this year. We always ask for the 100%. It's important. It's just an ask. And the reason why I say that, it's important that you are aware of what is 100%. And then you're able to make that decision. So we know that we haven't been funded at 100%. And I do realize when we get to this point that we do have reductions, and that's okay. We're doing very, very well. The history on this and the work that's gone into this is the reason why we don't have to fully fund through the tax rate all of the different costs in the year in which we're making these purchases. And that's a very successful program. And we stand leaps and bounds ahead of others in that regard, and something that our municipality should be very, very proud of.
Councillor Byrne?
Through you, Chair, just to follow up. So that 2.6 million, that's a moving target between inflation and additions.
Through you, Chair, just clarification on moving target. It's a fixed dollar value of what we use. So say you had a vehicle, it was $100,000 and it was going to last 10 years. That means 10,000 every year would be a depreciated value. So that's not a fluctuating number. What we're saying is what we decide, what council decides to put into that reserve, that's where the fluctuation is. Council is not legislated and required to put in 100%, but prudent financial responsibility is that you own the assets that you have today. So if you can't afford to fund those, we shouldn't be expanding and purchasing anything else.
Yeah, the fluctuation of the 2.6 million depends on the amount of assets that we're trying to cover the cost of the depreciation. So that number, 100% of that number, as we need to add more to it, will continue to go up and will be harder to get the higher percentages towards it, right? So we're going to lose ground just by the nature of expansions or new facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's the moving target, is what the total of the 100% will be. And just, I had it written down, Councilor Brink, just so, because I know Ms. Pope doesn't, but so in 2022, the total value that we put towards us, I don't have what percentage was, but it was $2,008,713 in 2022. And then in 2021, I have it down as $2,429,000,000. So this year, by my math, when I had it a slightly different number, it was 2.421. That was not just under 93%. So if we go almost 0.5% higher, like I said, it's more than we put away in 2001. So we're making good progress. Any other questions or anything about that? Or we can start talking about the two motions that we have, and we will let Kimberly get to work and have a 3% reflected in the tonight's budget presentation. Questions? Seeing none. Now I'm going to need some help from you, Ms. Page, I think, just to make sure that I get my motions right. So then the motion would, and the vernacular that I'm not sure about will be how we're referring to the 95,000 that's identified in number 8 for the Maple Leaf Park. So my feeble attempt at the motion would be something to the effect of, because we've already taken the 6,000 away. So I'm now talking about an $89,000 reallocation to the two transfers, correct, Ms. Pope?
So I have the calculations done based on the capital changes, which is a net zero. It's just the actual other pieces. Perhaps if we could take a break and meet with the clerk, and then we can have the motion on the table that's clear for council to vote on. Okay.
That sounds like a prudent idea. Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, like instead of doing a bunch of fancy math, I think we should just get what the end result of this is, right? So if it's going to be 90,000 in the splash pad and 50, let's just do that number rather than try to do all the rest of it. So if that's what you need a break for, then let's take the break and do it.
Yeah, I think it's just simple. We have, let's say 5 minutes and get it organized and have the appropriate direction given, and then we'll go from there, because we're just about done for the afternoon. Thank you. Okay, we're going to resume. Thanks for everyone for entertaining your patience with us. We have a few motions to read, and barring my inability to read the clerk's handwriting, I'm going to ask her to read the motions, and then we can, do you want a mover and a seconder one by one, or can we do them all together? We'll do one by one, if that's okay. All right, very good. Ms. Page, through you.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the rest of the members of council. The first motion that we need is to remove the pre-approval of the $25,000 in the capital 2024 budget for the corporate strategic plan.
Looking for a mover and a seconder for that motion. Councillor Natcha? No, we did not. We're just making sure. We redirected the 25,000 to not be a transfer to reserve to actually be a purchase this year for the corporate strat plan, but we failed to adjust the pre-commitment that we made in a previous motion that committed 25,000 in the 2024 budget year. I know it wasn't reflected in the motion, so we're housekeeping the motion. So we have a mover and looking for a seconder, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is carried. Second motion.
Through Mayor, the second motion is to remove $95,000 from the Maple Leaf Playground equipment in the 2023 capital budget.
So that was the mistake that I made in my communication. So we're redirecting that money. It's removing from the budget. Looking for a mover and a seconder for that motion. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor. That is approved. Back to you, Ms. Page.
The next motion is to increase the transfer to reserves for the splash pad work from $50,000 to $90,000.
Mover and a seconder. I'll make that motion. So Mayor Graham and Councillor Natchoff, all in favor. That is approved.
The next motion is to increase the transfer to reserves for the Maple Leaf Playground in the capital 2022 to the reserves of $10,000 from $10,000 to $59,000. I'm going to try that one again. So we're going to increase the transfer to reserves for the Maple Leaf Playground equipment project to increase from $10,000 to $59,000.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Looking for a mover. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Byrne, all in favor. That is carried.
And our final motion is to reduce the transfer from the ARR to the amount required to balance to a 3% municipal residential tax rate to fund the operating and capital budgets for the final budget report and final budget approval in February 21st, 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Page. So we'll look for a mover and a seconder. If anyone has any questions, we can discuss then. Councillor Natchoff is a mover. Deputy Mayor Huntley is a seconder. Any questions about that adjustment? If seeing none, we'll go for the vote. All in favor? That is approved unanimously. Thank you very much, Ms. Page and Ms. Pope, for that work. But also thank you to everyone in their departments. I know this is a tricky year, as especially Director Hancock mentioned, with all of the procurement problems and realities. And I think getting to a 3% is an achievement, but that's taken a lot of efforts from everyone. So very, very appreciative for all of that hard work. And with that, we have, do we need a motion to receive the presentation? I don't believe we've done that yet.
I think through you, Mayor, to the rest of council, let's just take a motion to receive it. We have amended motion number 1 to include the 3%, but let's just have a motion to receive it.
A motion to receive the budget presentation on the 2023 capital budget. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. And with that, there is a confirming bylaw, being bylaw number 2023-06, being a bylaw to confirm the proceeding of the special meeting held February 2nd, 2023 at 1 p.m. be read a first, second, and third time and signed by the mayor and the clerk. Looking for a mover? Deputy Mayor Huntley and Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is carried. And lastly, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Natchoff and Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. We will see everyone at the special budget meeting tonight, starting at 6 o'clock, where we'll hear from members of the public. And good luck, Ms. Pope, in updating all that information for tonight's presentation.